Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. Guest today, Francis Egan, boss of Quadrilla, the company leading the charge to bring fracking to the UK. Most people in Britain, certainly the communities where you want to frack, do not want you there. And that's a big problem for you.
Well, it would be were it true, but it's not the case. I mean, I spend a lot of time, as you might imagine, in Lancashire, and I certainly don't deny that there are people who are opposed to it. But I talk to a lot of people who are for it. I talk to a lot of business people who are for it. I talk to a lot of unemployed people in Blackpool who are for it. And if you look at the actual data, you look at the polling, what you'll find is that there is a small group of vociferously opposed people, about 20%. There is an equally sized group of people vociferously in favour. The vast majority of people in the UK have yet to make up their minds. So, yeah, the planning process is, rightly as you say, a democratic process. We went through that in Lancashire. Interestingly, we ticked every single box on all the safety and environmental issues, and it's correct to say that they turned it down, but not on grounds of safety, environment, emissions, water, any of the things that you might read about or hear about on the TV. They turned it down what I might call, they're not unimportant, but they're fairly traditional planning issues of traffic and noise. So clearly we did not get approval, but the planning process takes account of the local needs as it should, but also the national need, and that is why we have and are appealing. The planning officers themselves recommended approval, and the council's own legal department recommended approval.
But we don't have that. Do we need to frack when we can actually buy liquid natural gas, get it tanked over from the United States? That's the new reality.
So, well, let me say just two things about that, if I may. The first, there is this, what I might call an urban myth, that all this is happening in the United States in some kind of, unpopulated frack park where nobody lives. If you look at the Environmental Protection Agency study, the US Environmental Protection Agency study, the stats in there are that in 2013 there were 9 million people in the US living within 1 mile of at least one hydraulically fractured well. 9 million. And there were 7,000 or 8,000 public sources of water supply within 1 mile of hydraulically fractured well. So it's not the case that the US is somehow all happening out in the desert.
In one of those areas where there is quite dense population in a frack field, New York State, in that very big eastern gas reserve in the rock, New York State has decided to ban fracking because they believe that the public health issues are so uncertain, so many, to quote them, red flags, that they've put a ban on it.
Which is, quite correct and gets a huge amount of publicity, and you've repeated it again, and nobody talks about the 23 states in the US where it's been going on for the last 10 years with no environmental or health repercussions. Lots of allegations.
Well,
there isn't a single case in the US, and let me just finish this point, not one case in the US where a public water supply has been contaminated, interfered with or impacted by fracking. Not one. And in this country, our water is supplied by 99% of our water comes from public water supplies. In 10 years, hundreds of thousands of wells, millions of fractures, no impact on US public water supply.
Well, let us unpick then. I think you've now brought us into the various environmental arguments about the wisdom of fracking. Let's get into some of them. You talk about water. Let me just quote to you from the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health, an article by Dr. Madeleine Finkel. This is based on research in New York. The available science raises substantial questions about the harm to health. People living near drilling sites are presenting with symptoms, for example, skin rashes, nausea, abdominal pain, respiratory difficulties, headaches, dizziness. I could go on, there's many more. These, they say, demand further investigation.
Now, and I would say that is entirely typical of the claims against fracking. There is not one single fact that links any of that to fracking in what you said, and I suspect if you read the paper would be likewise. I have seen dozens of those. And it's very easy, in fact, almost too easy, to make assertions of negative health outcomes. If you want to claim a positive health outcome for a product, you have to jump through enormous hoops. Tests, blind tests. You can't put a drug on the market and say it's going to cure cancer and not go through all that. You can put a study out there and say, fracking killed my cat, and there is increasing evidence. There's no data.
This is the journal.
If you looked at the conclusions, and I think the Environmental Protection Agency studied 38,000 or so wells for over 5 years, and they concluded that there is no evidence of systemic pollution to US drinking water supplies. And I'll say again what I said a minute ago, there isn't a single case of public water supply being impacted in the US. And I'll be glad to be corrected if someone can point to one case where a public water supply... No, I'm not dismissing their fears. Don't get me wrong. I think the fears are absolutely and obviously genuine. And I'm not surprised with the degree of scaremongering that goes on around this, frankly. But if you look at the data as opposed to the assertions, it's not supported. Here in the UK, we would be injecting water, sand and one non-hazardous chemical at depths of 8,500 feet into rock through an 8-inch hole, miles away from public water supply sources. Methane is not a contaminant. You cannot contaminate groundwater with methane. Most groundwater already contains methane. And we don't, I think there is a perception somehow in the UK that the aquifer is some sort of pool of Evian that you drill into and the water comes into your tap. Water comes out of the ground, often containing methane, goes into a treatment plant which extracts it and lots of other things besides, and then goes into the public water supply. Yeah. Well, you'll forgive me if I think that the energy policy of the UK shouldn't be driven by Paul McCartney. I have a huge respect for his music, but or Vivienne Westwood for that matter. You know, the Royal Society, the Royal Academy of Engineering, two of the most respected institutions in the UK, have done that. Public Health England have done that. The Environment Agency studied the permits for which we want to, for which we applied for activity in Lancashire for 12 months plus. They concluded there was no risk to health or to water supplies and gave us the permits we needed. And as I said, Lancashire County Council turned the applications down not on any health or safety or environmental issues, but on the grounds of noise and traffic, which are important, but they're not what we've been talking about. Now, set against that, the country's running out of gas. We are literally running out of gas. Well, the gas shortage is in the UK, and of course you can import liquid natural gas, but there's two things about that. One, you are reliant on where you're supplying it from. So
all over the world, because frankly,
well, it's not all over the world.
There's a glut in the world. I mean, that's why the price is coming down. This is the market.
Yes, but it's not that straightforward to take gas, transform it into a liquid, put it on a ship it halfway across the world, transform it again back into gas, and then take it to your house or my house. Plus, not only is it not straightforward, it's expensive, and finally, and lastly but not least, it's hugely environmentally unfriendly compared to producing it next to the source of demand. The environmental requirements for LNG have been shown in terms of CO2 emissions to be 2 to 3 times what domestically produced gas would be.
I guess then we ought to...
No, we're talking about developing gas for the UK market. Now, I know you're putting forward the theory that you can, switch on an LNG plant and pop it on a ship and transport it from Algiers to Blackpool, in the flick of a switch. You can't. Gas is not actually as transportable as you might think it is. It requires a huge amount of capital investment to do that. So you do develop local pricing. You've seen it in the US. Why is the price of gas $2 in the US and $10 in Japan if it's so easy to transport gas from one country to another? It's not. So we should not, in my mind, it would be irresponsible for us not to even look, not to even explore our own natural resources. That fracking is natural gas produced from fracking is broadly the same as natural gas produced from conventional oil reservoirs. And why wouldn't it be? It's
well, you can quote your studies, I can quote mine. There's, again, we come back to uncertainty. There's a degree of uncertainty about how much methane your operations are going to put into the atmosphere.
No, I would take issue with you there, because there is one study, and there are innumerable other studies contradicting that. I don't think anybody reasonably actually accepts that now. I think that argument has been completely debunked.
So your argument to me, or not to me, but to the world is, you know what, we accept that we need to be moving to a decarbonised economy. We need to be moving to a fully renewable, sustainable economy. But in the meantime, give us permission to bring out of the ground vast amounts of new fossil fuel. Does that make sense?
My argument to you and to anybody else, frankly, is we need natural gas in this country. There are people around this country watching this now who have their central heating boilers turned on. 85% of the UK uses gas for heating. 60-odd% uses it for cooking. We are not going to be stopping using natural gas in this country for decades. The Department of Energy and Climate Change have come that. The Climate Change Committee have forecast the same. There will be natural gas used in the country. No question. The only question is, where are we going to get it from? I repeat, I think it would be irresponsible not to even look, bearing in mind we're at the exploration phase, not to even explore and see, can we produce that gas under the ground safely, environmentally responsibly? We're talking about a handful of wells to assess that. And we're not even going to look at that? And we're going to import it from Algeria and Russia?
So what then do you need to happen?
Well, I think it's like anything new in a way, particularly anything new going through planning, and fracking is certainly not unique in this way. We've seen it with Heathrow, we've seen it with HS2, you see it with any infrastructure development. It's a slow process to get started. And until you get started, you're open to all these assertions that it'll do this, it'll do that. And it's very hard to disprove an assertion when you can't point to anything actually happening. Well, I think, we don't have what I've described as a pick and mix democracy. You don't take the bits you like and discard the bits you don't like. So we've been through the local planning process. We've achieved a lot through that. As I said, we didn't achieve all the approvals, but we ticked a lot of boxes going through that. But it is an issue of national importance, which is why the Secretary of State has called it in, which is why he said he's called it in. We're not the only ones to get called in. They call in about 100 of these a year through the whole spectrum of industries. But clearly it's an issue of national importance. It would be, I go back and say it again, it would be irrational, I think, of us not to even explore our own resource. Well, I don't have any intention of giving up soon. I intend to see this through, because we need to drill and see whether this can be technically produced. We have always been upfront and said we don't know that yet.
All right. Well, we'll come back and revisit this when you know for sure. But Francis Egan, for now, thank you very much for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis.